Welcome back to the program. You're listening to Common Sense Economics for the Family. And on the program today, I've invited Dr. Paul Cleveland, who is a professor. He's a PhD of economics. And what's so interesting about Dr. Cleveland is he has connected the dots between economics and Christianity. And I want to warn you in advance that I'm talking to Dr. Cleveland on his cell phone, so we may have some interference, so just hang there with us, okay? So without any further ado, I want to introduce to you my friend, Dr. Paul Cleveland. Good morning, Paul, and how are you doing?
Well, I'm doing well today, Tommy. It's a good day. Appreciate you having me on the show.
What kind of tell my audience what you do, your field of study?
My field of study, I would say, is political economy, and by that, I think it's an intersection of several things of understanding economic principles properly, but then incorporating those into a consideration of history, of philosophy, and of the purpose of government. So that's going to involve also the study of theology, I think, which, years ago used to be called the Queen of the Sciences because it was our point of integration.
Well, Paul, I've read several of your books, Unmasking Sacred Lies, Basic Economics, and I know that you're a Christian. What does our identity, our image barriers of God imply about our economic behavior?
Well, first, I think it implies that we are the kinds of creatures who are aware of ourselves and we're capable of encountering the environment we live in and coming to know it and then having dominion or ruling over it. And so that is kind of central. And so God has created us as purposeful beings. And by that I mean we all can conceive of and think about particular ends to pursue in this world, and then utilizing the means at hand to the achievement of those ends.
Paul, way back in 1969, I took economics at the University of Arkansas, and my professors, they never taught anything like what you write in your books. Paul, would you be so kind as to explain your definition of economics or political economy, and why should Christians even care?
Well, that's a good question. I think we're living in a time where we desperately need to care about what difference it makes. What happened in my life is my parents are Christians, and so I was raised in a Christian home, made a profession of faith fairly early in life, and then went away to undergraduate school. And, I was taught economics the way it's taught in most places, the way it would have been taught at the University of Arkansas. And anyway, I wouldn't say that I wasn't living my faith out, and I was just on a path of least resistance and having a good time. And really, it wasn't until I was in graduate school at Texas A&M that God kind of woke me up out of that and called me to something more. And so at that point, and I thought, well, if I'm going to take my Christian faith seriously, then it's got to impact the way I think about economics as well, it would seem to me. But I didn't know what that would look like. And so I went and asked a couple of the professors who I knew were Christians on the faculty at Texas A&M. And to be honest, I was not impressed with their answers they gave me. It seemed like they were dichotomizing their faith with their science. And so what I came to understand was this, that back in the 19th century, naturalists hijacked the university and cut God out of the picture. And so the idea was that we could come to know everything solely on our own without any connection, without an anchor. And so what that did is it put forth the ideas of positivism in many different areas, and that's what affects economics today. And so that the underlying moral philosophy of economics, most professors don't know this, is utilitarianism. And utilitarianism was the brainchild of Jeremy Bentham, and he argued that the way we should choose public policies is on the basis of a hedonistic calculus, that, you know, whatever the proposal was, that you would add up the happiness that it would create, subtract out the pain it would cause, and if you get a positive sum, then that's what you do, and that there were no such things as absolute moral principles.
What is economic justice, and how is it achieved, or is it possible to achieve that?
Well, economic justice is pretty simple. It's thou shalt not steal. You know, taking what somebody else has produces by force or fraud. You know, and so that's really rather straightforward concept. That's part of the Ten Commandments, but it's also one of those things that you could understand quite apart from the scriptures. You know, John Locke, in his second treatise on government, you know, argued that all men are created and have life, liberty, and property as natural rights. That's a natural law. It's a self-evident truth that logic demands. And you know, you think about Locke's reasoning, that's pretty straightforward. Well, I'm aware of myself, so I know I'm alive, and therefore I assume I have the right to my life. Well, if I'm going to do that, then logic demands that I extend that to every other person. I also know I'm a volitional creature, that I have purposes and ends, and I believe I have the right to pursue those. Logic demands I extend that to every other human being. And finally, I know I'm a material, I'm a bodily creature, and interacting in a world where I need to produce property to live. Therefore, I have a right to my property, what I produce, and it ought not be taken away from me by the force of somebody else. Therefore, I have the right to my property. So life, liberty, and property are logically discerned as well as biblically mandated. In other words, natural revelation and divine revelation teach exactly the same thing.
Life, liberty, and property. That sounds a lot like Austrian economics.
It is. The Austrians have not lost their connection to natural law concepts, whereas through Bentham's most famous student and disciple was John Stuart Mill. And Mill introduced utilitarianism into the economic thinking of the English School of Economics in the latter part of the 19th century. And from that point on, it's become the mainstream way of thinking about economics, kind of that undergirding moral philosophy. So for much of the world, they've jettisoned the notion of the natural law because Bentham had argued that there was no such thing. And so to the extent that people have bought into that kind of thinking, we've created numerous problems. Now, not so the Austrians. The Austrians have kept before them a purposeful human actor. And so one of the chief principle then becomes the protection of private property in much of the Austrian literature.
Malcolm Gladwell, in his book The Tipping Point, said that it only takes 10% of the population to change the direction of the government. Would you agree with that?
I think that's pretty accurate, because most people kind of follow along. And, at the time that the founders were moving to declare independence from England, the same issues came up. I mean, the majority of the population in America at the time could have been moved probably either way. And I think it was Sam Adams that put it this way. He said, it doesn't take a majority to move people in a particular direction, but it takes a committed minority whose keen insight is to set brush fires in the minds of men.
Wow.
And so I think that's pretty accurate.
When would you say that it's appropriate for the government to use force?
Well, I think it's only appropriate when they have transgressed life, liberty, and property of others. In other words, I would agree with the Apostle Paul on this one, that the purpose of government is to punish wrongdoers. And the wrongdoing in mind here is not all wrongdoing, because some wrongdoing is self-limiting. In other words, if I'm making poor choices, imprudent choices in my life that only affect me, then, my evil is self-limiting. And really, people around me might admonish me to change my behavior and that sort of thing, but it's self-limiting. Now, it's different when my actions are imposing the cost on others. So if I go buy a gun and go hold somebody up and steal their stuff, and I'm acting beyond just myself and affecting others. And at that point, other people have the solidarity right to come in and make me stop. And so that gives us a purpose of government. What we need government to do is to punish murderers, rapists, and thieves.
Paul, we're living in a world today that many folks are trying to create a system to alleviate all suffering. Is that possible?
Not in this world, and because in this world, just ask anyone. Have you failed personally to live up to what you conceive to be a solid moral code? And anyone who's going to be honest has got to say no. And so that we do fail to live up to the perfect standard of morality means that we're going to bring some suffering upon ourselves into this world. That's I think that's inevitable. And there's no legal code that's going to overcome that one. That's why I'm a Christian. The only one who ever overcame that one was Jesus.
Jesus said, "Hey, you're going to suffer. That's part of the deal, right?"
Right. That's right.
Paul, let me ask you this question. In one of your books I was reading, you were talking about the workers in the vineyards. What does that teach us about justice and mercy, in your opinion?
That's one of my favorite parables. As a matter of fact, I was just on a trip and was able to preach on this subject. And it's important, I think, to get the context of that parable down. The context was this: that the rich young ruler had come to Jesus, and he went, "Good teacher, what good thing must I do to be saved?" And Jesus' response was, "Why do you call me good? There's none good but God." And I think the point of that was here's this young man. He's coming throwing around this word "good," and he wanted the young man to know that scriptures everywhere in the Old Testament teach that only God is good. And so he wanted to establish identity, the actors in the play, so to speak. And he wanted the young man to know that, indeed, you are talking to God incarnate. And so Jesus then carries on with answering this question, and he starts with the Ten Commandments, but he doesn't start with number one. He jumps down the list to the second half of the Ten Commandments, which all deal with interpersonal relationships. Honor your father and mother, don't steal, don't lie, those sorts of things. And so the young man goes, "Oh, those I've done all my life." And in other words, he had his view of himself was overly estimated and of his own performance. And so Jesus stops, jumps right back up to the number one commandment on the list: "You shall have no other gods before me," and says, "Okay, go sell everything you own, give it to the poor, and come follow me." And so the guy walks away a little empty-handed. Now, it's interesting because James and John and Peter and the other disciples, they're watching this encounter. And by their reaction, you know what they've got to be thinking. Because, in fact, they say to themselves, who can be saved? And I think of this one for a moment. Peter, James, and John, they were all fishermen. And they had boats. Now, if you had a fishing business and you owned a boat in that day and time, you were not poor. You were in the upper middle class. I mean, it was because a boat like that was pretty significant capital investment. And Peter had a house in Capernaum, and he didn't sell it. And so, you know, Peter's first up, as he usually is, he says, "Look, I've given everything to follow you." But he's thinking in the back of his mind, I wonder if that house I have in Capernaum or my fishing boat, I wonder if those things count. You know, and we need those because we've stayed in my house and we've gone out on my boat many times. And I know James and John have got to be thinking the same thing. And they're wondering, gosh, you know, we haven't sold that stuff. And so Jesus looks at them and he goes, "You guys don't get it, do you?" And he says, "Let me tell you a story." And so that's when he tells them the story of the workers in the vineyard. Now, you know the parable.
Right.
You know, guys go out and work. Some guys work all day. They're guaranteed a day's wage. And some guys don't work but part of a day. And they're just told they'd be paid what's right. Now, what did they expect? Well, they expected to get paid part of a day's wage, whatever proportion of the day they'd work. And so at the end of the day, when the owner of the vineyard pays them, and he gives guys who only worked a couple of hours or so a day's wage, well, they got more than they deserved. In other words, they got grace. And some people in the story only get justice. They only get what they deserved. They only get what they earned. And the whole point was, it was up to the owner of the vineyard to be gracious to whomsoever he should choose to be gracious, and to treat with justice whomsoever he desired to treat with justice. You know, so that's the point, and the point then is this: if you're expecting to go to heaven on the basis of your own efforts, get ready for a rude awakening, because you're going to end up getting just what you deserve.
Wow.
And the rich young man had come to Jesus thinking that he could earn it. And what he wanted the disciples to understand is, this one's one that you cannot earn.
Paul, as Christians, as a Christian community, we've been given a lot of responsibility. I mean, we are the salt of the earth. You know, we're the light of this world. We need to start acting like we need to take responsibility and start doing what needs to be done to teach our families how to become better stewards of God's Word.
You know, that is true. And see, that's part of image bearing, and I write this in many of the things I do now, is that, you know, when Moses is writing Genesis and he's using that phrase that we bear the image of God, well, that phrase was well known, you know, in both Mesopotamia as well as Egypt, but it was not generally applied to all people. Typically, it was only applied to the king, that the king bore the image of God and imposed it from the top down. And so when Moses is saying, no, that's not the way it is at all, guys. Every one of you, men and women, every one of you bears the image of God. He's literally saying, every one of you is a king and a queen. Every one of you is put here to determine God's will for your life and to carry it out.
Wow. Paul, in closing, let me ask you one last question. We live in a tough world. We live in an economy that is changing so drastically. Inflation is on the rampage. The Federal Reserve Bank is absolutely destroying our money. I mean, only 3 times in history have we had paper money, and since 1971 we now have a Federal Reserve note instead of the silver certificate. knowing all this, and most people don't realize what's happening to them. They're like a frog in a boiling pot of water. What would be your words of encouragement to the Christian community, especially concerning our economy?
Well, I'm tirelessly working to try to educate the Christian community myself into sound economic thought. It's never been needed as badly in our nation as it is right now. And, so I would think first, if you think you're educated on economics, as an economist and as a Christian, I can tell you probably not. For the average guy in the street, I don't care if he's been to college, I don't care if he's majored in economics. He's probably not thinking like a Christian in his economics. It took me quite a while to, ferret out the inconsistencies. And I had help along the way. I had some good teachers who really helped me along the way in that regard. So, and in my own books and my own work, that's what I'm trying to do, is just to educate people. And then beyond that is coming up with a good strategy to how are you going to manage your own house, your own financial house, in a world where others are trying to create an unjust scale. In that regard, I'm thankful to my good friend Nelson Nash, who, taught me infinite banking, because it's been a way for me to manage my own financial house, by taking advantage of sound principles of economics and finance.
Paul, again, I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to share with my audience, and I hope we can have you back on the program again sometime.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, Tommy. And, like I said, I think good things are going on. The Institute for Faith Work and Economics that, I'm working with as a senior research fellow, new institute. We're out there trying to do it, and in my own work, trying to, put some good materials out there. So I'm ready to teach, and glad to do it.
So, folks, until next week, same time, same station, I just pray that you'll have a very blessed week.
Ain't that America? Something to see, baby. Ain't that America? Home of the free.
Thanks for joining us this morning for Common Sense Economics for the Family with your host and teacher, Tommy Ruff, chartered financial consultant and master certified estate planner with 29 years of experience in the financial services industry. Pick up your phone and call Tommy on his toll-free number, 1-888-244-0747, and let him send you his special financial report, Common Sense Economics for the Family. This report is changing the way Americans save money and create wealth. That number again is 1-888-244-0747. Thanks for listening, and God bless.
Ain't that America? Something to see, baby. Ain't that America?
This program is created to educate the public on the subjects of money, the pitfalls caused by the lack of planning and understanding the challenges we all face in the near future. It is strictly educational and designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regard to the subject matter covered. It is presented with the understanding that the presenter is not engaged in rendering legal, accounting, or investment advice. If legal, tax, or investment advice is required, you should seek the counsel of a qualified professional.